I'm going to talk to you today about Ruth. But before I do, I usually take the sketch notes for the sermons. And so, since I can't speak and take the sketch notes, I made a little copy of sketch notes for you to take. These are for you just to keep your notes if you want to take notes while I'm speaking or through the series. These will be available to you. Part of my company, I have a strengths company, and I work a lot with children. So I do little tips for my clients on tips on how to know your children's strengths, because right now we're going to talk about your strengths. But if you have a child and you want a little tip on how do you know when you have a younger child what their strengths are, I've just put tip 1 of 8 in the back for you. So grab a piece of paper, and we'll just give you a little tip this week is on creative play. And through their play, how will you know what their strengths are? We are going to be doing also one more thing, is on Wednesday at 6 p.m., I am going to do a kind of a debrief Bible study on Ruth online. We have a large following of people that are coming online that want to know about these topics and this series. And so if you're wanting to join us, you can join from home in your pajamas. Just log on to the Facebook account, and I will send you a link to Google Hangouts. Some of you have no idea what I'm talking about, right? Any 12-year-old will help you be able to get onto Google Hangouts. But I'm sure if you have a 12-year-old in your neighborhood or in your house, ask them and they will help you log on, and it's just clicking on, and we're going to finish this topic of Ruth. Ruth as Relator. Happy Mother's Day, everyone. Whew, it is good to be here. There are 2 women in the Bible that have books named after them. One is Ruth and one is Esther. They have kind of similar stories. Ruth is a Gentile woman who married a rich Jewish man, and Esther is a Jewish woman who married a Gentile king. Esther was an orphan. Ruth had her father-in-law passed away, her husband passed away. They have a lot of grief in both of these women, and both of these books talk about redemption like you've never had seen before in the Bible. This particular story is all about a family. It really starts, this whole book of Ruth, very, very beginning, starts you off with a family that made some choices. And then it kind of zeroes into this one woman, Ruth, and tells you her stories. So I thought I would Google famous families just to see what comes up. And let's see if you can name them. So these are some of my favorite families. Brady Bunch, okay, you're good. All right, try this one. This is actually the first family that I Googled for famous families. Aw, that was my boss. That's my tribute to my old boss. Ruth as Relator. Let me tell you a little bit about relators. I know Jonathan came up and said relator is a friend, and they are. The true definition is people exceptionally talented in the relator theme enjoy close relationships with others. They find satisfaction in working hard with friends to achieve a goal. These are people that have deep relationships with one another. Now, I have 2 kids. I have Macy and Katie. Katie, you saw singing. Macy was playing the piano. I'm going to tell you about their 2 talents. Katie is a relator. Macy is a woo. So some of you don't know what that word means. Woo means winning others over. They work like this. Katie's, you could see it best on Facebook with the 2 girls. Katie's Facebook page is her and her 67 very deep friends. She knows everything deeply about these people. If you are on Katie's Facebook page, it is because you are a deep friend with her and she shares an intimate relationship with you. Macy's a woo, on the other hand, and it's Macy and her 5,000 best friends that she knows very little probably about, most of them, but she has a wide network. Now, if we want something done, we ask Macy to post it on her Facebook because she has a wider network. If we want solid, grounded people, we might ask Katie's bunch of friends. The difference are a little. The relator wants to know, I want to get to know the people that I already know. How many of you in here know your talent? You know you're a relator. Okay, you are the one. I want to get to know the people I already know. A woo says, I just want to get to know more people. See the difference in those two? They're both talents, both different. Woo would be the courtship. Relator would be the marriage. Not that you can't be married and woo, because I'm a woo too, and I've been married for a long time. But Ruth gets deep into Naomi's messy story. She gets involved in a story that she doesn't need to be involved in, but she does because of this very deep relationship that she has with Naomi. But before we start the book of Ruth, you have to just look at the book right before, which is Judges, and it kind of gives you the setting for Ruth. Here's the setting for Ruth. The verse right before Ruth starts says, "In those days the Israelites did not have a king, so everyone did whatever they thought was right." Kind of sounds like today, a little bit, right? There's no king. It is the rule of the judges that are happening right now in Israel, and it is a tumultuous time. So this is the setting for Ruth. Ruth comes, Ruth 1:2. Long ago, during the time the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man named Elimelech left the town of Bethlehem in Judah. He, his wife, and his 2 sons moved to the country of Moab. The man's wife was named Naomi, and his 2 sons were named Mahlon and Chilion. Doesn't seem like that bad of a thing. Guys moving, there's a famine, we're going to move, find another place to live. But they named all these names. Why is this a big deal with names in the Bible? It's very important because children were named after how either the parents viewed God or something that happened in their birth. So, for example, Esau and Jacob. Esau's name meant hairy red man. So when you see him, you're like, "Hey, hairy red man, how you doing?" Like you're looking at, that's his name. His name is hairy red man. Jacob's name was heel catcher because when he was born, he was holding onto the heels of his brother. So they named him heel catcher, which means Jacob. Elimelech, his name means my God is king. Pretty good, strong name, right? Naomi's name means pleasant. She was a pleasant person. And then we have their sons, Mahlon and Chilion. Mahlon's name means sickly or weakling. That's great. And Chilion means crybaby. So can you imagine your whole life? Your name is crybaby. That's your name that you're going to live with for the rest of your life. Ruth's name, however, means friend. Her name actually means friend. And we're going to learn later about a man named Boaz, and his name means strength. But there's this city of Moab. Now, we hear about all these ites in the Bible. The Moabites, the Ammonites, the Philistines, I don't know, who are all the ites, right? The termites, all these ites that are in the Bible. Ammonites and Moabites came from a very interesting place. There was a man named Lot. How many of you remember Lot in the Bible? Lot had an incestuous relationship with his daughters. They both had children. One was named Ammon, and the other name was Moab. Now you see why the Israelites are having trouble with this kingdom? This is a major problem. Moab was not a place that Israel needed to be. It was forbidden. It was actually so forbidden in the Bible that in, I think it's in Deuteronomy, it says that you could not, a Moabitess or a Moabite person could not come into the synagogue for 10 generations. It's serious. Moab is no joke. So Elimelech has a decision. He makes kind of a dumb decision because he leaves the promised land, which Bethlehem means house of bread. He leaves this place of the promised land where there's providence and there's God and there's provision from God. He leaves there to go to Moab, which is forbidden by law. Naomi, after her husband dies, makes a choice. She chooses to stay in Moab. The sons choose to marry Moabite women, again, forbidden by law. But the last choice is Naomi decides to return to Bethlehem. She changes directions. She does what is called repentance. You're walking one way, and you turn around exactly 180 and walk the other complete direction. Now, this is the view from Bethlehem to Moab. In Bethlehem, they were having a famine. They were not be able to eat, and Elimelech looked over the Dead Sea and saw Moab and said, looks like that's pretty fertile land. I think I'm going to move my whole family, and we're going to go to Moab because it looks like we can eat and become, sustain ourselves there. And so he decides to go around the Dead Sea and go to Moab. Ruth 1:6-7. While Naomi was in the country of Moab, she heard that the Lord had helped his people. He had given food to the people of Judah. So she's hearing word, hey, back in Bethlehem, God's providing food for his people. So Naomi decided to leave the hill country of Moab and go home. Her daughters-in-law also decided to go with her, and they left the place that they had been living and started walking back to the land of Judah. Naomi is finding that there's blessing happening in Israel. And you know what? She probably decided that this is probably not the best decision for me and my family. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back home. I'm repenting. I'm changing my direction, and I'm going to go back. There's nothing for me here. Why, though, would the daughter-in-laws follow Naomi? They don't have to. Their home is Moab. That's their tradition. It's their gods. It's their people. It's their way of life. They know the culture in Moab. And let me tell you, Israel, the city of Bethlehem, is not going to be kind to know that there is a Moabite person living in their city. Remember, they have a long-standing tradition with that name, Moab. And Bethlehem is a teeny tiny city. Anybody here come from a little tiny town? Nobody comes from a tiny town? We have 2 people come from a tiny town. Bobby comes from a pretty tiny town. He waved. When I first went to Kansas, we were driving down the street. He's waving at people. I'm like, do you know that person? He's like, no. I'm like, why are you waving to people? He's just waving to people. I thought it was just really strange that he would wave to people. But you waved. Jack, did you wave to people? Just randomly wave. Yep. Well, Bethlehem is this little tiny town. So when they're going back, this is a problem. So Moab is over here, and they're going to walk up around the Dead Sea and come back down to Bethlehem. And they're walking, and they get, I'm going to guess, probably where that river, where they have to cross the river. And we have 3 women, and they are a crying mess. So again, they cried very much. Then Orpah kissed Naomi goodbye, and Ruth hugged her and stayed. And Naomi said, look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her home people and her own gods. You should do the same. Both sister-in-laws are shedding tears. There's 3 women. They're in this place of decision. One turns back, and one makes a commitment. There is a difference between making a disciple and making a decision. 2 different things. A disciple is going to stay. Somebody that makes a decision can also make a decision to go back, right? There's a difference there. But these 3 women are at a crossroads. They're walking and talking. It doesn't really seem like a significant conversation that they're having. They're probably talking about their husbands and, that they're going to go back, what life is going to be like in Bethlehem. But their conversation is not only going to change their lives, but this short conversation is going to change millions of people that come after them, including you and me. This tiny, insignificant conversation between 3 crying women. Why would Ruth decide to go with Naomi? Because she loved her. They had a deep relationship. Those deep relationships are not always logical. I actually understand Orpah returning home. She's going back to her family. In Bethlehem, there's nobody she knows except for Naomi. And Ruth is okay with that because she loves Naomi. She's okay with having one deep friend. and sorrow connects them. They've both experienced their husbands dying. They've both experienced a tremendous amount of sorrow in their lives. And so Ruth is connecting with Naomi both in her sorrow, probably her empathy towards her, and this deep friendship that she has with her. Ruth is not afraid to work for her friend. She knows that when she goes to Bethlehem, they're going to be widows. Now, in those days, widows, this was not a fun time. You had nothing. You were not protected. There was no provision. And like I said, remember I said it was the time of the judges? This is a dangerous time in Bethlehem. This is not like, yay, Bethlehem, like we see a little town of Bethlehem that we see, we see pretty Christmas things. Bethlehem was not, it was a pretty scary little town. And in the time of the judges, it was a really scary little town with a lot of prejudice. And she's going back to that, but she trusts Naomi. Ruth 1:16-17, you see this a lot in wedding invitations. This verse, and I'm going to read it to you. Ruth says, don't force me. Don't force me to leave you. Don't force me to go back to my own people. Let me go with you. And she says this, where you go, I will go. Does this sound familiar to you? Yeah? Where you sleep, I will sleep. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die. And that's where I'll be buried. And I ask the Lord to punish me if I don't keep this promise. Only death will separate us. This was said as a deep friendship. We see it on wedding invitations all the time, right? It was funny, Christine. You just had, you got for your wedding or for your wedding gift shower a big thing that said, "Where you go, I will go." This is where it came from. This is the story where it came from. She trusted her. Let me tell you something about relators. Relators are one, steadfast. She says, "Don't make me leave you. Let me go with you." Her relationship was deep. She is humble. Where you go, I will go. This is a promise that a student would make to a master teacher in those times. I'm gonna let go of my will, and I'm gonna let your will be done. It's a humble thing. She's unashamed. Your people will be my people. And her people are not going to be kind to Ruth. Knowing that coming in, she knows. And she's still willing to say, your people will be my people, even under those circumstances. It's spiritual. Your God will be my God. This is a really important time for Ruth because right here is her conversion. She says, I believe in your God. Your God is now my God. All those gods that I have back they did baby sacrifices in Moab. I mean, Moab was crazy. She's saying, I'm getting rid of all that I know, and your God is now my God. It's my conversion. She saw a change in Naomi. She saw something in Naomi on that walk that made her believe that this is the conversion. This I'm going to change, and I'm going to be a part of this. And it was complete. There's no return ticket. Where you die, I'm going to die. I'm going to be buried with you. She's willing to burn her bridges. So all the bridges that she has at home, done. The ladies' night of worship, my mom gave a story about Jehoshaphat and was talking about involvement versus commitment. Now, Orpah was involved with Naomi's life. She loved her mother-in-law. She was willing to follow her halfway. She's involved. She gets some brownie points for following her halfway. I mean, she does. The 3 women walking in the desert by themselves, she gets brownie points for that. But Ruth was committed to Naomi. It's kind of the same difference as your favorite breakfast food. The chicken is involved with the breakfast relationship. The pig is committed to the breakfast relationship. Right? It's true. That's how it is. Bethlehem was this little teeny tiny town. And people know, even in the whispers of coming in, they know, oh, the Moabitess is coming with Naomi. We're going to see her. I have one of the kids that I teach comes in every week and says, or every day she comes, she's like, Miss McGuire, you want to hear the hot goss? I guess that's like a term in middle school. I'm like, no, not really. And then she'll go on to tell me whatever the hot goss is. I am sure that the middle school kids in Bethlehem were like, you want to hear the hot goss? There's a Moabitess coming to our town, and she's living with Naomi. It was a big deal. And they would glean the harvest. Gleaning is kind of God's welfare system. What they would do is they would have this big, all the barley that was out, or the wheat, or whatever they were harvesting. The crop owners would go one time and clean up all the wheat that they could get. But they didn't go a second time. It was forbidden. It was the law that they could only go once. So whatever you get the first time, that's what you get, and you have to leave the corners alone. You couldn't harvest the corners. And that would be so the poor people could come and take whatever's left over. They could go and get the seconds and then get the corners, and they would kind of help finish off the harvest for the farmers and then also get food for themselves. And so Ruth is willing to do that work. She's willing to go in a country she doesn't know, people that don't like her, and she's willing to live as a poor person and just pick up the leftovers from this farmer that is leaving food for her. There was a rich man named Boaz living in Bethlehem, and Boaz was one of Naomi's close relatives from Elimelech's family. Later, Boaz came to the field in Bethlehem and greeted his workers, and he said, "The Lord be with you." And his workers answered, "And may the Lord bless you." I want a boss like that. I totally want a boss like that. I want a boss that comes in and says, "The Lord be with you." And I say, "And may the Lord bless you." Don't you want a boss like that? He's kind of a good boss. Like, he's kind of a happy guy. He spoke with his servant in charge, and he says, "Who's that girl?" And the servant says, "She's the Moabite woman that came with Naomi from the country of Moab." So not only middle school students had the hot goss, it was going up the ranks, so the people knew exactly who Ruth was. Let me tell you, Relator theme belongs in the relationship domain. So all of these talents belong in different domains, and we talked a little bit about them yesterday in my class. But it belongs in the relationship builder domain. This is the essential glue that holds a team together. So relators are those people that help hold people together. They have this really unique ability to make much greater the group, better than all the sum of their parts. So they just like are that thing that holds you in. That's a relator. But when we talk about relator, I would be crazy not to mention to you that Jesus is the ultimate relator. In the book that I wrote, which is coming out tomorrow, I end every chapter with Jesus is the ultimate, because I believe we are given a gift from God. He has given each one of us a little piece of who he is. But there's no way we can measure up to how God is the ultimate in each of these themes. Ruth is a great friend. Where you die, I will die. I'm going to go where you're going to go. I'm going to live. I'm going to work for you. She's a good friend, but doesn't touch the hem of Jesus' garment. When Jesus says he's a friend of the tax collectors and the sinners, God listened and talked to these people. He listened to his disciples. He was patient with them. He could relate to them, and he relates to us. Proverbs says, "One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother." That friend who sticks closer than a brother is repeated again in the New Testament. Hebrews 13:5, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." Think about that. I will never leave you. You can't make that, no matter what a great relator you are, you can't make that promise to anybody. I will never leave you nor forsake you. But God does. It's a story about Ruth. She makes a choice that day, when they're walking. Some here are going through a decision process too, and I want to talk to you about your decision. You can choose to be like Orpah, who walks for a little bit with Ruth and Naomi, but then decides to do the easy thing and go back home. Orpah realized the cost, because there was going to be a great cost to following Naomi, and Orpah realizes it and goes back home. You could be like Naomi, who does the right thing, who made a bad decision, but is now going to repent, turn around, and walk home. Or you can be like Ruth, who was so inspired by her friend's testimony, so inspired by this deep friendship that she had with Naomi, that she changed the trajectory of history with her decision to become a believer. Changes history at that moment. The worst that God has for you is better than better than the best the enemy has for you. I want you to think about that. God doesn't have anything bad for you, by the way. But the worst that God could possibly give to you is better than any of the best things that the enemy has for you. He got nothing for you. We have a great opportunity to learn about these talents and different heroes of the faith. But it all starts with a change. It all starts with a decision. We all have a decision to make every day in life. If it wasn't for Ruth's decision that day, her decision that day affected the birth of Christ. Let me explain. It was one of the most important decisions in history. It will determine if Jesus is born in Bethlehem or not. God is working out his mess, his plan in this crazy crying mess of these three women. Because this is what happened. Ruth married Boaz. They have a son named Obed, who has a son named Jesse, who has a son named David, who becomes king. The Messiah is going to come through David's line. That decision that Ruth made on that one day, seemingly insignificant, such a simple decision, changes history. It means that Jesus is going to be born in Bethlehem. Your decision today is going to affect all your tomorrows. Every decision that you make now affects all of what happens later.
Oh, Jesus, we love you. Oh, how we love you. You are